Guys, I thought about the Pierce family very early this morning when I received the news about Scott Bloomquist. Bob, I want to start with you. You went up and down the road with this man, spent so much time with him. I know he was a friend of the Pierce family. Honestly, Bob, how sad and heartbroken were you this morning when you learned about Scott's passing?
Oh man, you ain't ready for stuff like this. I mean, yes, a guy like me getting older and older and older someday, yeah, they're going to read about me just keeling over the racetrack, I hope. But uh, something like this goes on, and knowing Scott like I've known him, and I just talked to him in Fairbury a few weeks ago to Prairie Dirt. We're talking about chassis and all the stuff we always talked about. That's what we talked about. We've had our family moments. We talked about parents and all. With my dad passing away when I was young, and him and his dad with, their dealings. Being a father son, kind of like me and Bobby right now. So we've had all that kind of conversation, and racing against him. Got a chance to outrun him a few times. He's tough. He always was tough. There's stories, a lot of stories, but one sticks out in my mind is when '84 I was down in Woodstock, Georgia for a NDRA race, and I knew who Scott was a little bit. I ran against him down there at Knoxville in the late '70s, early '80s. I just walked up to him and said, "Hey," I go, "why aren't you on the road taking all this money?" I go, "You're kicking everybody's butt." And he says, and I'm pretty sure we figured it out the other day, he's either 19 or 20. And I went, "Oh, okay. I didn't know you were that young." So, it goes back a long, long way. Stopping at my place on and off through the years. It's kind of like I'm in the middle of the racing area right there. So you kind of stop there every now and then, knowing Danny Myers as well as I did, and Tony Wiggins and a whole bunch. I mean, Russell Owens that worked for me with the Dependable Carburetor was one of Scott's earlier crew guys, and I had him for about 3 years after that. I mean, so there's just I don't know. I guess I'm trying to race today and not thinking about it a lot, but it's a heavy heart for sure.
Bobby, you got to watch so much of this growing up, right? I say all the time, you are as born and dyed in the wool dirt late model as it gets. Your father's a Hall of Famer. Your father's Bob Pierce. But all these stories your dad tells and has told you over these 20-plus years now, I know this is not only a hard day for you, but you got to witness so much of Scott close up and personal. As you now begin your incredibly illustrious dirt late model career, how did you view Scott, Bobby, and getting to see him personally like you got to see him, I'd imagine was a really cool experience from a young kid from Oakwood, Illinois.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, not a whole lot of people get to see some sides of Scott that, just the general fan that comes up to him. Sometimes you're super busy out there racing, and you know how Scott was sometimes, and although he loved his fans, but yeah, him and my dad being really close friends, Scott would always come up, talk to us any chance he got. And this goes way back to as far as I can remember, obviously. And I know I grew up watching him race. I grew up kind of idolizing his driving style. And obviously he won everything back in the day. There wasn't a race he didn't win. And I know some of the things that I do today, I kind of apply out on the racetrack based off of Scott. I remember saying how at Florence, that was the first time I saw him do a crossover, and he got the lead back. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do that. So little things like that. And it goes back to, I know one time he won at Eldora, and I forget if it was the Dream or the World. I think I was there racing at the time. I must have been pretty young, like 16 or 17, around that time frame. And we went over there, like me and my dad, and he just pulled us onto the hauler, like, come on in. And, of course, they're celebrating. And at the time, Randy Sweet was in there, him and Randy being good friends. And, yeah, Scott really helped me out with many things. Kind of thinking back to it, he helped me out with some sponsorships even, with Randy Sweet. And he was very giving. So a lot of people might think of Scott as like a intimidating race car driver, but very, very great guy, all around. And, racing's a tough life sometimes, heck, you see all the things he's done. It's just crazy. Looking at these pictures right here, been around this sport forever, and he's shaped this sport to what it is today. And, I think the racers today got to give a huge thanks to everything he's done. And, just the way he's done it in his Scott Bloomquist way. It's a legendary way that he's how he's done things. You know, obviously I haven't been around to see it all, but I hear lots of stories, and some things are like, wow, you know, pretty eye opening, everything he's done for the sport. And but yeah, it's goes way back. Heck, at the Dome.
Right.
He helped me do my driver intros one year at the Dome. It was when I was doing a Scooby-Doo. What was I had like some Scooby-Doo characters, and he was the villain. He was one of Scooby-Doo's. He got into this character, and he wore the mask and everything, and no one really knows it, but he was back there really getting into character, and he was like doodling on the mask, having a good time with it. And that was kind of interesting to see, you know, a legend of Scott Bloomquist and how serious he can be, just kind of be in the moment of that and have fun with this. So lots of good memories with Scott. Obviously my dad has way many more than I do, but
we'd be here all day.
Well, and I know you guys got a race to get prepared for. I don't want to take much of your time, but Bob, I do want to ask you this. Listen, there is a little bit more romantic period in dirt late model racing. Now, your son is blessed to race in a time where there's more money on the line than ever before. But Bob, you were blessed to race in a time where there was no smartphones, there was no social media, and guys like you and Scott Bloomquist were out beating the road down, having the time of your life. I know there's some stories that we are not going to tell on air, but just touch on those romantic days back in the day, Bob, of him and you on the road together, and you're across America. And I had to imagine those were some of the best times of your life, and some of those memories involve him on the road, I'd imagine.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, we could be here all day long talking about that. I don't think a lot of people know how well I knew Scott, how much we talked on the phone and at racetracks, like Eldora, for instance. He won a world, and I don't even know what year it was now, but I know Bobby was probably maybe a couple years old, and my daughter was like, what, 6, 7? And we pulled up top, as always, to get our money, you know, and I walked up front there, and of course, there's Earl standing there, and then Scott's close by me, so Earl comes out, he gets talking to me and Scott, so me and Scott get talking, and we get our money, and we're walking back to the haulers, and he says, hey, get up in my truck here real quick. And of course, you know, Angie, my wife, is real good friends with Katrina and all that stuff, so they get off, sit on one side of the motor of his truck, and me and Scott sit on the other. And we talked, like I said, this about family stuff a lot, you know, and some racing, but we got in more personal stuff than a lot of people knew. And it was 4 o'clock in the morning before we got done talking. and I got to go, Scott, my kids have been in the truck sleep this whole time, you know. I mean, so stuff like that. You know, I know one of the times he came by our house. There was a 10,000 win race up in Michigan, and he wanted to go up there because that's where, you know, Sweet's at. And there was 10,000 at Peavey. I said, hey, which way we going? And he said, well, I'm going to Michigan. I said, well, then I'll go to Peavey. I'm not going to follow you, right? So late at night, we're coming down the road. Danny Myers calls me and says, hey, how'd you do? And I go, I said, Moyer got me in traffic. I was leading it. I run second. How'd you do? He says, we won. And the story of this is we were still scaling race cars at that time for all this load machine thing coming around, right? Well, Danny threw Scott's car on our scales, on my scales at my house, grain scales, not electronic, grain scales. Yeah. And he said, don't tell Scott I did this because I'm supposed to scale this at home. I said, well, what's it look like to you? He said, looks good to me. Well, when they won, I said, hey, did you tell him about the scales? And I thought Danny was going to fall off the phone. He goes, no. And Scott says, well, them are the sacred scales then, he says, because I just won 10 grand, and that's where the story. So I got sacred scales at the house.
Bob, real quick on this one, how smart was he? To me, you're one of the smartest minds in the sport. You never get enough credit for how smart you are. I think a lot of people know, but how smart was he about race cars, Bob?
Well, when you called about wanting to do this, the first thing popped in my mind is before the Spring Master machines came around, and right now we're in the trailer. That's what we were doing just a minute ago. We're taking all these shocks and springs apart, putting other springs on, doing shocks, putting on a mash machine, getting these new numbers. Scott didn't do a mash machine, but every race he raced, he had his shocks and springs apart. Wow. We go to Farley one night after he just won 10 grand somewhere the night before, and I go in his trailer, and he's got all his shocks and springs apart. I said, what are you doing? You just won last night. He goes, well, shit, man, it's a different racetrack. I got to change springs, you know, Scott does. And I went, oh, okay. And he's measuring that, and goes out and kicked our ass. So he was doing that crap before we even thought of doing with a masher. He did it with a tape measure and thought.
I know he's got lots of stories how like 3 a.m. Scott cuts the fuel cell out of his car and welds it.
He was going to cut my fuel cell out of my car at 3 a.m. And I said, Scott, we're not doing that. And he says, it don't look right. It ain't setting right. And he got that big glass of Crown. And he takes a big swig, one of them big, excuse me, people, fuck, like he does. And I said, no, let's go to bed. I'm done. That's Scott.
Bobby, I know you guys got it ready for Hot Laps. Bobby, one final thing for you. I've not told a lot of people this story. Him and I talked within the last year, and he really did. He told me, I said, hey, nobody's really going to be able to do anything you ever did, but if you had to say somebody who could, and he cut me off before I even finished, and he said, Bobby, it's going to be Bobby Pierce. Part of the reason I tweeted what I tweeted after the North-South, that you are the greatest pure talent I've ever seen, is because Scott Bloomquist told me that you were the greatest pure talent he's ever seen. For a guy like that who's now not with us anymore, Bobby, to say something like that, what is that? Especially on a day like today when we don't have him with us anymore, man. When you hear that, what do you think?
It's crazy. I don't know. I mean, obviously he's the GOAT, best to ever do it. So it's great to hear that. Yeah, I think me and Scott had a good relationship way back when I won my first North-South. I passed him to do it. He was at the time a little salty when I did pass him, but after that and everything, like I said, we had a great relationship, and I think just on the level of respect, game respects game, and yeah, I don't know. That's awesome to hear, though. He definitely, but he's probably forever the GOAT. He's just the way he won the races, but the way he moved the crowd, the fans. Yeah, the amount of I don't know the word I'm looking for here, but he had an effect on the racetrack as a whole. So,
Bob, do you think for old time's sake tonight, if Bobby has a tough run, let's cut the fuel cell out at 3 a.m. tonight? What do you think?
Well, thank God we're bolted in now because it'll be easier to move. So we had everything welded in back in the day, but he didn't care. You give him a sawzall, he was going to go at it. So I guess if we have to, we will.
At least drink a little. I think at least drink a little Crown tonight, Bob. I think we can all do that.
I've never been a Crown guy, but I think I will just for him.
All right. Thanks, Bob and Bobby. Good luck at Makoka tonight, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.